Moritz Rawlings is a doctor of medical sciences, president of the Tennessee Heart Institute, and former personal physician to U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower. Bringing patients back to life, Moritz Rawlings discovered that if you interview a rescued person immediately after resuscitation, you can often hear from him about unpleasant impressions received on the other side of life. Previously, I treated patient stories about postmortem sensations either as a disorder of thinking or as a play of the imagination. But one morning, it was in 1977, I was trying to bring one patient back to life. When he regained consciousness, he told me with trepidation that he had been in a real hell. This man was so scared that his fear was transmitted to me. This and other similar situations left me with no doubt that there is life after death, and that this life does not always bring joy. This is the conviction that this cardiologist, who has extensive experience in resuscitating patients, has come to. The cardiologist dedicated his book to these very impressions of his patients. In it, Rawlings presented cases of negative post-mortem experiences that his patients told the cardiologist about. Moritz Rawlings said, "I always believed that death is a physical fading away. But I had to abandon my views, because one day I came face to face with another world. That day I was examining a patient. He was 48 years old. He worked as a rural postman. During the examination, this patient's heart stopped. The patient fell to the floor before Rawlings' eyes. The doctor did everything possible to save this man's life. Several times the patient regained consciousness and lost it again. Each time the patient opened his eyes, he shook the office with a deafening scream. He insisted that he was in hell and prayed for salvation. I was afraid of losing the patient. But I was even more frightened by his words about hell. When the patient came to, his face was distorted in a terrible grimace. He was shaking all over. Opening his eyes wide, he said hastily, "Don't you understand? I'm in hell. Help me." At first, I brushed off his words, believing that the patient was saying this because of severe emotional stress. I told him, "You are preventing me from working with my hell," recalled Moritz Rawlings. Soon the doctor was convinced that his patient's fear was genuine. The patient was in such horror that Rawlings had never seen before. When the patient came to his senses again, he asked the doctor to pray for him. "I'm a doctor, not a priest," Moritz Rawlings nervously responded to this request. The patient continued to insist, claiming that this was now his only salvation. Realizing that this was the patient's last request, Rawlings recalled the words of a short prayer he had learned in Sunday school. He continued to save the patient, praying out loud. This patient was saved. He was sent to the ward. And Rawlings went home. Having crossed the threshold of his apartment, the doctor immediately went to the shelf with books. He found a Bible there and began to read. Moritz Rawlings wanted to find a description of hell in this book. A few days later, Rawlings approached the saved patient to ask him about what he saw during cardiac arrest. The doctor wanted to know if he saw a fiery pit and creatures covered in fur. "What hell are you talking about? I have never seen anything like that," the patient said, looking at the doctor in surprise. Moritz Rawlings described in detail to the patient what happened at the moment of his salvation. However, the patient did not retain any negative memories or feelings about that day. Rawlings suggested that his memories were so terrible that they were eventually erased from the patient's consciousness. Moritz Rawlings came to the opinion that our world knows only good postmortem experiences for the reason that patients who have experienced clinical death are interviewed several days after the event. During this time, according to the doctor, bad impressions are erased from a person's memory, and he remembers only his positive feelings. Rawlings was not the first to put forward this idea. The Dr. Walter Myers also insisted on an immediate interview of such patients, who said, "I think science could learn a lot if doctors began to question patients immediately after they came out of unconscious states. It is possible that at this moment their memory still stores visions that appeared to them when they were unconscious. Subsequently, these visions can be erased from the patient's memory. Having studied this phenomenon, Moritz Rawlings turned to his colleagues, asking them whether they had encountered similar cases. Some of them reported similar experiences of their patients. Thus, Moritz Rawlings learned of one case that happened to a 53-year-old woman who decided to end her life of her own free will. I was a housewife. It seemed to me that all members of my family treated me like a servant. Sometimes they behaved as if I did not exist. One night I decided that I did not want to exist like this. When I left this life, I understood that I was committing a sin, but I saw no other way out, the woman said. Having lost consciousness, to her horror, she discovered that her life was not over. The woman recalled that at that moment she saw herself slowly descending into a black pit. She was able to discern a small light spot in the darkness, which grew larger with each passing moment. Soon the woman could see that there was a fire burning at the bottom of the pit. The lower she went, the hotter it became, and the harder it was to breathe. The woman was horrified by what she saw. She remembered God and began to beg him to give her another chance. This woman came to herself in the hospital. She was told that she had been unconscious for 2 days. The patient immediately told the doctor about her experiences, but he explained these visions as a hallucination caused by taking a large number of drugs. Some patients interviewed by Moritz Rawlings experienced clinical death and various sensations more than once. The doctor noted that in the first case, such sensations can sometimes be negative, but the subsequent sensations are always positive. At least in Rawlings' practice, the opposite has never happened. As an example, the cardiologist cited one of his patients who at different periods of his life experienced 3 heart attacks and was saved 3 times. During the first episode, the man found himself in a reddish fog. He saw some horrible creatures writhing at his feet. But the next 2 episodes left him with the most pleasant memories, and he was no longer afraid of dying. This patient is no longer alive, and I often wonder where he is now. Many people prefer to believe that death is destruction and oblivion. In response, I can give them the stories of my patients. And if we do not listen to those people who claim that they have seen life after death, then in this case we put our lives on a losing position. Because from some of the stories of my patients it follows that dying is not always safe, said Moritz Rawlings.